My name's Tim Street, so I am the Secretary of British Pugwash and the Coordinator of Student Young Pugwash, and with me today is Matteo Bordan, who is on the board of Student Young Pugwash. Matteo, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I'm a PhD student in Queen's University Belfast. I'm a PhD in physics, and I'm originally Italian, but I moved for my PhD in quantum optomechanics, to be specific.
So today we're interviewing Professor Dame Athene Donald, who is Professor of Experimental Physics and Master of Churchill College and Patron of British Pugwash. So hello Athene, thank you for being with us.
Hello.
We just enjoyed your talk, which is really interesting. And so Matteo's going to kick us off and ask a few questions about your life and work, and then I might ask you a couple of other questions. Okay. And so Matteo, yeah, off you go.
I'll start from the science side, which it's absolutely a pleasure to meet you. It's very inspiring for a scientist, a person who's aspiring to be a scientist like me, to meet someone like you. And so the first question for me is about your work. And so I come to know you work in the field of soft matter and the study of polymer structure. So if you can spend some words about what is it, why it's interesting, and what's your research about?
Okay, so I should say I am retired from the university now. But yes, I researched soft matter and increasingly moved from conventional polymers, things like plastics, towards biological material. And, you know, I started off studying things like, why do plastics break? So very sort of everyday kind of problem. And I moved on to that to study the mechanical properties, so why foods break. In particular, I was looking at starch products, things. I always use cheesy Wotsits as the example. So what is it in the processing that means you've got something that's crunchy but isn't going to break your teeth? And from there, I moved to study starch itself, and that sort of took me into biology, so that by the end of my career, I was working on proteins and whole cells and things like that. And it's very much, you know, what I like about that is it is the everyday, it is things that we all encounter. And these are things that matter. You know, it's quite easy to say, you know, the Higgs boson, that's so exciting, but does it make any difference to us? It may, I don't know, I know nothing about it, but, you know, I like the fact that this was sort of really quite practical stuff.
I really share your view, thank you. And I really got fascinated when I did some research about your work about crazing and all these things, that you live at the crossroads of many different disciplines. Yes. You live at the crossroads of like hard physics, of chemistry, biology, and also you have this interest about nuclear weapons and more, I would say, actual concern of whole society. So my question for you is more on this side this time. And what do you think are the ethical responsibilities that scientists have today?
Yes. I mean, where I got closest to the ethical issues during my own research was on genetically modified organisms, or food, really. And it seemed to me that it's important to get the science out there so that people can't be scared inappropriately. Now, I've just given this talk about the dangers of nuclear weapons, where I think there's plenty of evidence that nuclear weapons are really, really dangerous. But as with the COVID vaccine, as with GM foods, there was a lot of misinformation being put out there. And I think it is really important that scientists are honest about what they're doing, and that they try and make sure that misinformation is not propagating, that they are willing to talk about this is what the science says, this is what the science doesn't actually know. It's really important to be open about where there is uncertainty. And I think sometimes people want scientists to say, this is how it is. And as the COVID pandemic developed, scientists tried to be quite cautious. You know, is it airborne transmission? Is it through touch? You know, is it contagious? And to begin with, scientists didn't know. And I think it was difficult for the media, say the policymakers to accept that uncertainty in science is real. You know, we have to be uncertain until the evidence is strong enough.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I will land I will leave the word to Tim for a couple of questions.
So I think the first question I'd like to ask is what achievements are you most proud of in your work as a physicist, and what advice would you give to young people wanting to start out in a career in science or academia?
So those are two very different questions. I alluded to the fact that I work at the interface of different disciplines, and when as a relatively young physicist I started working on food, my physicist colleagues were horrified, basically. You know, that you can't do decent physics on food, it's too messy, biological material is really too complicated for a physicist to do what physicists do. And I think what I'm most proud of in a way is the fact that I persevered. I didn't let them say, you shouldn't do that, and just walk away. I continued. And over my career, it became more acceptable to do it. And I would like to think I had contributed to that I had demonstrated, if you like, that you could do decent physics on something as messy as starch, and that increasingly that message got out there, if you like. I mean, I'm hardly going to take credit for doing it single-handedly, but I think I was part of that change. And physics now absolutely sees working with biologists, doing work in the biological arena as part of what they would naturally do.
Okay, and thanks for that. And so coming on to the other question then, what advice would you give to young people? A lot of the people who will be watching this hopefully will be students and young people. What kind of thoughts or advice would you give to them if they were going to start in a career in science or particularly in academia?
Well, I think the first thing is make sure you're really enjoying it, because you get people whose teachers or parents have said, you know, I don't think you should do that, I think you should do that kind of thing. And you know, we see in the colleges, we see students whose heart isn't in it because they didn't want to disappoint their parents or something, and that can be quite challenging. So make sure you have chosen what you really want to do. And then don't let other people tell you can't do it, kind of thing. And I think that's particularly a message for women, because there is still, certainly in a subject like physics or computing, engineering, there's still a sort of societal expectation that that's not what girls and women do. And if you are hearing that all the time, it's quite hard to keep fighting it. That's not something that I had as a young scientist. You know, I wasn't told women shouldn't do it. The reality was there weren't other women doing it, but I wasn't told I shouldn't do it. But I think that is still quite a prevalent view. And it's all right to change your mind. I think I would also say, you know, I've had PhD students who set out thinking they wanted to do research or thinking that they didn't want to do research. It's okay to change your mind. You've always got to do what feels right for you. And sometimes it's quite hard to work that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that myself. That's really good words of wisdom there. Did you want to ask the question next?
May I ask one other question? I myself am a PhD student, and many times I like dialogues with my colleagues in the PhD room. And one thing I got within my colleagues, but also in the kind of research environment for PhD students and even postdocs, is that people want to contribute to society because there's a general feeling of science being too self-referential. Scientists talk only to scientists, and science talks only about science. And there's the missing of an outreach to society. So my question for you is, what do you think young scientists or even young professionals can do to bring science more into society?
Well, one thing is to be willing to talk at science festivals and go into schools. There's always a need for more scientists to go into school and enthuse the next generation. And there are lots of schemes that make that possible. The other thing, and this is something I didn't do as a young scientist, but it is an option. So I've got very involved with policy. So mainly policy for science, but there's also science for policy if you see the distinction that one is taking your science and trying to influence regulation or whatever it may be. The other is talking about what needs to be done to get the best science done. And there are schemes for you as a PhD student, it may depend on precisely what your funding is, that will fund you to go and spend 3 months, say, working at the one of the departments, to be an intern, to go to work at the Royal Society. There are places where you can go to learn more about what those options are and how you can influence policymakers. I had a couple of my PhD students take up these kinds of internships. One, I can't remember, they may both have gone to the Government Office for Science, I can't remember now, the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology. And one decided, no, that's not for me, and has gone back to academia. The other is quite senior now in a policy research organisation. So, you can try out things by that route of taking an internship. And some of the UK research councils make it quite easy to do that.
Just a very quick follow-up question. Sometimes one has the idea that working towards society or with the policymakers and working in the hard science are exclusive. You can only choose one. What's your take on this, and since you have done both, what's your experience?
There are only so many hours in the day, so it does depend a bit, how your PhD is going, what you think your long-term aspirations are, so how much effort you're prepared to put in it. How have I managed? Well, as I say, I came to policy quite late. I came to it because I was asked to chair the Royal Society Education Committee, but at the same time I took that on, I also became this university's gender equality champion, at which point my research just, I still had a research group when I started, but I didn't by the time I'd finished. You cannot do everything, and you have to make choices. And in my case, I didn't consciously make that choice. But I found, by the time I did both those roles for 4 years, I found by the end of it, I had made a choice without noticing it, if you see what I mean. And, that's perhaps unsatisfactory. Perhaps I would have liked to have made that choice more consciously. Everyone is different, and all the opportunities that come your way are different too.
Thank you.
So you've mentioned your work concerning women in science and promoting women in science, and you've written books on this. You have a very active blog where you write quite outspoken articles about this. You touch on issues to do with bullying, cultures in academia, things like this. So I was wondering, in terms of your career, what progress have you seen and what challenges do you think still remain?
Okay, so in terms of progress, the absolute numbers are very, very different. I don't expect to go to a conference and find there are only 2 women in the room. And I say that with feeling. I've recently come back from a conference I've been going to for 30 plus years. And the first time I went, there were 2 women in the room. And now it's about a third or something, which is probably representing the community. So that's an absolute change. On the other hand, I'm not sure, women still face subtle, denigration's a bit strong, but things that may knock their confidence. It doesn't have to be harassment. One of the things I used to get fed up with was I was always being told, you're so passionate. And I thought, yeah, right, maybe I am, but would you say that to a man? And it's the kind of adjectives that are used, the kind of standard parsing, women are aggressive, men are assertive. These kinds of things are absolutely still prevalent. And it may be hard to find a mentor if you're in a minority. I personally don't think a mentor has to be the same as you. The men in my life have been my main mentors, just partly because there haven't been other women around. So there has been progress, but it's not yet, and it's not just about gender. I mean, there are all kinds of areas where there is not true equality. And I would also say, and I think it's important to stress this, that there are disciplines like psychology or English where men are in the minority. And it isn't seen as something that men do at school. You know, you look at the numbers doing psychology or English A-level, the numbers are the inverse of what it is in physics. And that is something wrong with our society, that we have these strongly gendered ideas about what is appropriate.
Okay, great, thank you for that. Turning now to a couple of more politics questions or Pugwash questions. The first one is, just wanted to know how you talked in your talk a lot about Joseph Rotblat and Pugwash, but I just wanted to how you personally first came across Pugwash and why, your first impressions of it.
So, I can't really answer that. I mean, I've known about Pugwash for a long time, and I know, I know when I was elected to the Royal Society, I got a letter saying, did I want to join Pugwash or something? I thought, I must deal with that, but I never got around to it. So I don't know when I first knew about it. I will say I did not know that Jesuit College held Rotblat's archives until about a week ago, which I obviously should have known. But as I say, I was brought up being terribly conscious about nuclear threats, and I presumably that's why I knew about Pugwash, but I couldn't tell you.
Okay, great. And finally, you might actually find this connects with your thoughts on policy and your work in advising government or involved in those kinds of groups, is if you can make one change to current government policy, what do you think it would be?
In the science arena or anywhere?
Anything you feel like.
Funding schools better, I think. Okay. I mean, people talk a lot about the NHS, which is also absolutely vital, but our schools are just being systematically starved of money. The fact that, things like schools collapsing, school roofs collapsing because of wreck, and yet there is no new money put in, that it's coming out of the existing schools budget. Those kind of things really worry me.
Okay, that's a good point to finish. Matteo, did you have anything further, or shall we wrap up?
Thank
Okay, well, thank you so much for talking to us.
Okay, thank you.